Bapak-bapak dan ibu-ibu yang terhormat, selamat pagi dan terima kasih banyak atas kesempatan ini. You have no idea how nice it is for me personally to be back here in Indonesia and to share the platform with Pak Sulisto, Pak Kamal, Pak Hatta is a great honor. I have spent 8 of the happiest years of my life in this country on 2 different occasions, and it is a very great joy to come back and see Indonesia emerging as such an important global player. The international discussion on climate change and sustainability can be very frustrating at times. Sometimes reminds one of 2 men standing and looking at a beautiful house, and the house is on fire. And the men look at each other and they say, the house is on fire, should we not put it out? And one of them says, well, are you sure it's on fire? Maybe it's just smoke. The other says, no, I think it's really on fire. We really should put it out. And then one says, yeah, but aren't you the one who left the gas on? You caused the fire, you put it out. And the person says, well, yeah, but I can't put it out on my own. I'll get burned, so you have to help me. So the other says, well, okay, you go first, though, and then I'll come in later if you need me. And the first says, no, we need to go in together. And I'm not willing to go in unless you go in. You've got to do your bit at the same time. And the other says, well, okay, I'll come in with you, but only if you pay me. And the person says, well, I'll pay you, but only the incremental cost. And I actually don't really trust you, so I'm going to have to get my lawyer. And then they say, well, this is getting too complicated, so let's have some meetings. And we meet every year, and we then have intercessionals. And in the meantime, the house keeps burning, and people get hurt. Now, some people look at the climate change negotiations, and that's how they feel. But actually, there is good news. There are more than 90 countries today that have now registered their intentions with regard to addressing climate change with the UNFCCC. If you add these 90 countries' commitments together, and these are not legally binding, but they're commitments up to the year 2020, this represents the biggest effort in the history of the world to address greenhouse gases. And that's a wonderful thing. The problem is, it's not enough. If you add them all together and you look at the very top range of what's been committed, it works out to about 60% of what we need to do by 2020 if we're to get on to a world that only warms up by 2 degrees. Currently, we're on the way towards global warming of 3 or 4 degrees, and this is very serious. Most of the calculations that have been made in terms of the impact of climate change assume only 2-degree warming. And even with that, the impacts are very large. For developing countries, maybe something like 5% of GDP will be taken off permanently. But actually, if the rate of warming is 3 degrees or 4 degrees, it's going to be much more serious. Temperature rises will seriously affect our agriculture and our ecosystems. Extreme weather events will become even more extreme with huge impact. Sea level rises will take away a lot of our cities. Yesterday I was in the Philippines, where they are launching their climate change action plan. Of the 1,500 municipalities in the Philippines, 60% of them are in low-lying areas, making the Philippines perhaps the most threatened country in the world with regard to storm surges. Indonesia also is very deeply threatened by climate change. Well, so much for the bad news. There's good news too. In Cancun last December, the world made good progress building trust and agreeing on some important steps. On mitigation, countries agreed to register their plans and to open them to discussion. A compromise was agreed in principle on monitoring those plans. And a timeline was agreed for 2015 to review the level of ambition. An adaptation framework was agreed to try to ensure that adaptation is no longer the poor sister of mitigation. Reforms to carbon offset markets were agreed, which will lower costs and help more flows go to low-income countries. It was agreed that the clean development mechanism could continue to operate after 2012, even in the absence of a new commitment period under the Kyoto Protocol. Progress was made under RED, avoided deforestation, with agreement in principle on country-level approaches and the incorporation of forests into global offset carbon markets. And a mechanism for creating technology centers in key developing countries was agreed. Now, most of these agreements were in principle, and the great challenge for negotiators this year is to add flesh to the bones and to figure out what it actually means on a Monday morning. And the Durban Conference of the Parties will be extremely important later on in November and December this year. And it's going to be a very difficult path from here to there because there are some tough political issues, particularly relating to the future of the Kyoto Protocol and to the legal nature of the global deal. The best news, however, is not to be found in the halls of negotiation. It is to be found in the world of action. It is led by the private sector and by leaders at the political level who have long-term understandings. We see this in requests to the World Bank almost every week. 10 years ago, maybe 10% of the 150 client countries of the World Bank would have asked us to help them with climate change. Now, almost 90% of countries have said to the World Bank Group, please help us on climate change as one of the 3 or 4 major issues you work with us on. As a result, we're now working in 130 countries on climate change, especially here in Indonesia. Countries are using their own money to address these issues, and they're mixing it with international support. Developing countries have actually become the center of innovation for many of the new things that are happening with regard to climate change. Last year, more than $250 billion were invested worldwide in clean energy. More than half of that was in the developing world. 53 billion of that was in China. Indonesia is also becoming a serious player with regard to renewable energy, particularly in the field of geothermal, where 27,000 megawatts of untapped capacity exist. Today, only 1,000 megawatts are currently being exploited, but there are plans to replicate that and expand it, and it's a great privilege for the World Bank Group to be part of that. Innovations are also happening in policy. 100 countries today now have renewable energy targets and policies. 40 developing countries have feed-in tariffs to encourage renewable energy. A growing number of countries are introducing market-based instruments to reduce emissions. China is introducing a cap-and-trade system in 4 of its largest cities and 2 of its provinces. South Africa has designed a carbon tax and is currently consulting stakeholders on it. We've just launched a $100 billion grant facility to help 20 middle-income countries, including Indonesia and China and India and Chile and several others, introduce market-based mechanisms. There are also a lot of innovations in finance as well. Carbon markets themselves obviously were a remarkable innovation. These need to be reformed and made more programmatic so they can take much larger sums of money and can go to low-income countries too. Other financial innovations include, for example, green bonds, which are allowing organizations like the World Bank to tap into savings markets that weren't available before to support development in developing countries. The World Bank groups already issued more than $3 billion of green bonds. New developments in risk sharing and insurance are taking place. Caribbean countries now, they're able to spread the risk among themselves so that whenever a hurricane strikes an island, for example, funds disperse within 24 hours directly to those countries. Other countries are experimenting with getting money very quickly through insurance systems to households when difficulties strike them. Money is, of course, essential to the issue, and today in Mexico City is the first meeting of the interim committee for the new Green Fund, which potentially will be the largest international fund ever created. It could be $20 or $30 billion a year. It needs to be designed efficiently and well to get the job done. Let me make a final point here. It is appropriate, as others have said, that this conference is here in Indonesia. Indonesia is showing great leadership in the fight for a sustainable future. President Yudhoyono has laid out a very ambitious target to lower greenhouse gases by 26% compared to the business as usual path, and another 15% if funds become available. This is not a pie in the sky ideal. It is linked to a very serious plan to address the forest issue. It includes a top-class analysis of alternatives to logging and forest conversion. It includes participation of key stakeholders. It includes new institutional and legal framework, and it includes very serious financial commitments from the government itself, from countries like Norway, and from the international community. Crucially, Indonesia is not willing to trade environmental protection for economic growth and job creation. The slogan is not just 26%, it's 26 and 7, with the 7 being the rate of growth that Indonesia needs and wants to employ its growing workforce. A new paradigm is emerging worldwide, as sustainable development as a phrase is giving way to green growth. All around the world, the private sector is realizing that it can actually make money and it can do good at the same time. Indonesia's private sector can be at the forefront of this new paradigm. It's entirely appropriate that these organizers, the government, the Investment Coordinating Board, the large and important private sector organizations, civil society, and international organizations come together. The world is watching Indonesia, probably more than any other country with regard to forests. If Indonesia succeeds, many others will follow, and a new paradigm will have been developed. If Indonesia fails, all bets are off. And this is why it is so important that we work together. Only together can we achieve what is to be done. So everybody in this room, private, public, academic, civil society, international organizations, donors, and so on, have a role to play. Let me commit to you on behalf of the World Bank Group, which has had the privilege of working in this country now for more than 50 years, and Stefan Kobeli and his very large team here in Jakarta, let me commit to you our 100% total support to make this a success, and I wish you the best today and tomorrow as we struggle with these issues together. Thank you very much.